So, all right, today we have my old friend Evangelos Simoudis, Managing Director at Synapse Partners. They help corporations apply AI, and they also invest in startups that are developing applications that exploit data using AI. So, Evangelos, welcome back to the Data Exchange podcast.
Ben, it's good to see you again, and thank you for the invitation.
All right, so the reason I have Evangelos here on the podcast is for some reason, I guess great minds think alike. We kind of inadvertently tried to write the same post. Maybe we had different kind of angles on it, but the idea is we're halfway through 2024. Let's see where we're at with this generative AI thing. And so Evangelos has a post called Where Are We with Enterprise Generative AI, which I will link to in the episode notes. All right, so the first point you cover here, Evangelos, is the current state of adoption of enterprise generative AI. And two things that you point out. One, we are in the early stages of adoption. And secondly, the current investments are slowly ramping up. So maybe tell us how you came to these two conclusions, and then we'll go over some of the implications.
So we've used multiple data sources. So what prompted me to write the article is that on the one hand, we've had the experiences from our own firms working with corporations. But then over the past couple of months, several investment banks have issued their quarterly CIO reports. And in these reports, there are a couple of things that stand out. Number one, there's no question that now AI has become again an enterprise initiative, an enterprise imperative, if you will. But the second thing is that if I look at where the budgets are coming from, what is being allocated, what type of projects are being performed, both the reports by the investment banks really confirm what we have been finding in a smaller scale. And so my intention was to say to at least the people who read my work that there's a good reason to be excited about AI, but there's also a good reason to take hold of where we really are so that we can plan for the future.
And so you also strike, like you said, you also strike a hopeful tone in the sense that you also found that corporations are slowly increasing their investment. So now, for our listeners, I wrote a kind of similar post called "Why Are Your Generative AI Projects Failing?" I think part of it is I just felt like I don't want to be cast as just as a cheerleader. I also wanted to tell people some of the challenges that we have. So this notion that I guess that investment is slowly increasing is kind of what I found when I looked at some surveys myself, that the adoption rate seems to be growing. And there's reason to be hopeful, at least for the entrepreneurs listening to this podcast who build tools for corporations, correct?
Yeah, so let me give you a couple of numbers that I thought were interesting. So first of all, as Goldman Sachs reported, about there's a 3% incremental budget that goes to AI in general, and most of that goes to generative AI. We're 14% of the CIOs that were surveyed by both Morgan Stanley and RBC, the Royal Bank of Canada, indicated that they have projects in the works right now relating to AI. So all of that is very hopeful. Morgan Stanley also reported that, and I have these statistics in the article, that 89% of the CIOs that the survey say that they, in the near future, they will release AI projects. Now, again, what I found, what I wanted to be cautionary with the readers is that when the CIOs say we're going to have a project, it doesn't mean we're going to have something that goes into production. It means that we are experimenting. We are encouraged by our experimentation, but we're still evaluating through these experiments. And there are a few things that have to come into play into this evaluation. And I know that you wrote about a few of them in your article, and I wrote similar points I made similar points in mine. And it all starts about what type of model do I use? Do I start with a foundation model? Do I start with some other type of large language model? Do I use the model out of the box? Do I do some fine tuning? If so, what if I fine tune? How do I fine tune? There are all of these questions that and issues that the CIOs and their teams have to contend with as they progress from this excitement about AI and converting the excitement to real projects and to real value. And that's something that needs to be appreciated.
So in your, based on your assessment, Evangelos, so is AI an actual line item in the budget, much like, let's say, cyber security or security or business intelligence?
It is becoming
or is it like every one of these groups has some kind of AI that they're spending on?
I think, okay, I understand what you're saying. I would say that it depends on the organization. There's no question to me that there's now a line item in budgets, in IT budgets that relate to AI. Number two, very much like we have with cybersecurity and business intelligence and so on. There is also then there's a question of where is the budget for this line item coming from, and where I have disagreed with many of the cheerleaders of the AI cheerleaders is that at least in the enterprises today, and particularly enterprises that we deal with, that line item is filled by taking parts from other budgets and putting them into the so-called AI budget. In other words, we are not seeing yet the enterprise being willing to say, I'm going to increase my IT budget by some amount, and that new amount is going to go straight for AI. And I think we're at the cusp of that, but a lot of these experiments that that enterprises are working on and companies like ours are helping them with, they have to go in the right way before we see now new budgets being allocated rather than budgets being reallocated.
Right. And so let's see. So what are some of the main challenges in your mind that are facing corporations? So in my post, I laid out kind of systematically based on surveys what these are, but I'd be curious what you found.
Yeah. So I think to me, the first challenge is going from this corporate employee using AI at home, and then maybe starting to bring it into the enterprise in the place where they work, and going from that stage to something that is incorporated into business workflows, into the enterprise's workflow. So that's challenge number one, because today, a lot of this experimentation, a lot of this engagement is happening by individual employees. And as I say in my article, actually, it reminded me a lot of what was happening with email and the beginnings of the internet wave back in the late 90s. In other words, people started using the internet and started using email at their home, be it with AOL or some other ISP, And then all of a sudden they say, boy, this is a really good experience. I can get a lot of value of that. Why can't I have this at work? Right. So they started incorporating this in their work and started going to their CIOs and talking about it. I remember that because at that time I was with IBM and we were getting so many, even internally, we were getting a lot of questions from employees saying, why can't I have at work the same type of environment that I have at home? Right. So I think it's the same thing is happening now with AI, and we have to credit ChatGPT for getting us into this, right? All of a sudden, I mean, compared to other AI waves that we've been over, at least this is my fourth AI wave, as I say, but compared to the other three that were driven by the enterprise, this one is driven by the individual, okay, into the enterprise. So that's challenge number one. The second challenge has to do with data. Just because you're,
by the way, stop on the first one. Actually, it's interesting because Microsoft and LinkedIn have a survey and they coined the term for what you just said: bring your own AI.
Yeah. And I think that if the corporation can accommodate that, then they go a long way of addressing the challenge. Corporations, again, based on what our firm does, corporations are not ready to deal with this challenge yet, right? Because bringing your own AI has a lot of issues from security and privacy and all sorts of stuff, like ethics, right?
Yeah. And then the second challenge, I think I actually wrote an entire post on this called Data Strategy for Generative AI. But I'm interested. I'm curious to hear what you're hearing.
Well, so what we term data challenge is really a multitude of sub-challenges, if you will. There is the data quality, there is the data privacy, there is the data rights. I mean, I started my day with a conversation with an automaker in Europe, and they're trying to introduce ChatGPT into their vehicles. And he was saying, well, here we have GDPR. How are we going to deal with providing the right customer experience on the one hand and addressing privacy rights, addressing privacy regulations, and everything else. So that's kind of like another sub challenge. The third sub challenge, if I can call it, around data is what data do I use and how do I need to pre-process that data in order to get the right generative AI behavior. And this, to me, this has been one of the best lessons that I consider I learned myself, because I've been in AI, as I said, for a very long time, and I'm used to building discriminative models. And there you label data and for training in one way. For when you go into these generative models, training is very different, and how you label the data, how you use the data to do fine tuning versus RAG versus any of these other any of the available approaches for taking an existing model and making it do what you need to do. So that's another of the data challenges. And there are a few others, but just to move on a little bit here, so which model you start from is a bigger issue than I think we thought about.
Actually, let me just make one point on the data thing, which is basically a few years ago, actually, we had maybe in the order of 5-6 years ago, we had this wave of new startups building data engineering tools that target data for lake houses and warehouses.
And we invested in a couple, yes.
Yeah, and so in many ways, we kind of need some similar tools that target some of the data sources that we will use for unstructured data and so now we have new file formats that kind of are building on top of ideas from Parquet, for example, Lens and the one from Facebook. And I think there might be some good developments here in terms of tools for data preparation, refinement, data gathering and ingestion. And I guess, and Evangelos, staying on the data for a second, are there lessons from the big data era that people should learn? You know how in the big data era, there was so much
Yeah.
hype, and then there were a lot of abandoned projects. So there might be some similar lessons here, right?
Yeah, and to me, the lesson that keeps coming up is just because you're dealing with a lot of data, it doesn't mean that you should ignore the quality of that data. So there's this notion, particularly because of the way that generative AI has been presented today, is that you bring truckloads of data and you don't have to worry as much about data. The tool will take care of it, like the model will take care of it. And that's not the case. Okay, we still need to worry about data quality. We still need to worry about the characteristics of that data, the biases, the distributions, right? All of that.
Or the
And in fact,
or any kind of structure that you can get out of the data, be it metadata. And we talked about in a previous conversation, we talked about if you can even extract a knowledge graph out of this data, maybe you get more. Maybe you don't need as much data. You just need to get the most out of your data. Right?
Exactly. And you need to worry about, again, you need to understand in the same way that when we are building discriminative models, we have to worry about, what is this model going to classify? What is it going to predict? Similarly, we have to understand with generative models, how is the prompting going to work? How is the interaction with that model going to take place through APIs, through prompting, whatever? And all these usage considerations need to be taken into account during the data ingestion, during the data labeling, all of this pre-processing that you do to the data. And I don't believe that we are paying yet enough attention to that. I'm talking about the enterprise. I'm sure companies like OpenAI and Cohere and Google and all that, the people who are deeply enmeshed in this are obviously paying a lot of attention while they're also learning. I don't think the average enterprise is there yet.
All right. So one of the things you talk about are use cases that are now popping up in the enterprise here. I'll share quickly a graph that I put together from job postings, and it kind of resonates with what you found, which is basically some of the early use cases tend to be in this customer support, customer experience enhancement area, right?
Right. We see, in a sense, three to four areas popping up across industries. Customer support is definitely the one that has come up the strongest. Marketing content creation is another, right? Whether it is for advertising, whether it is for
email,
other email, so there's that. Code re-engineering and code generation is a third one. And another one which I didn't write about just because I wanted to keep the list manageable is training, right? So a number of companies are starting to think about how do I use these systems to train novices on the use of a particular component of a particular system that I have in particular process. We started getting questions. I saw in the graphic that you shared. We started getting questions about how does generative AI get injected into either existing business processes or help me to rethink an existing process and redesign it. I don't have a recommendation there, but all I'm noting is that some of the early adopters that have, in other words, that have some experience with it, are starting to ask that question, and I think it will be a challenge for whether it is management consulting and IT consulting firms, as well as IT organizations within a corporation, to determine whether a process needs to be re-engineered and generative AI injected into it, or completely redesigned with an eye where now the generative AI becomes the principal component as opposed to just an add-on.
So based on your conversations with enterprises, if you were to assess their level of excitement around generative AI, not abstractly, but based on early experience, early experiments, and things like that, are they excited?
Yeah, I would say that in our case, it's more than conversations. I mean, we're participating in projects, right? And they are, I would call it, frankly, intrigued. Okay, excited by the early results, right, by these experiments, and intrigued enough to be willing to proceed, like to keep going. But I will not, I don't think we have reached yet the point where the business executive says, oh my God, now I'm going to see a 30% jump on my productivity, right? On my group's productivity, on my organization's productivity. I don't think we're there yet. Over the long weekend, I was carrying a conversation on LinkedIn with an individual from AWS, and his statement was, well, we're seeing tremendous productivity improvements. And I wanted to throw some caution to the wind to say that we're intrigued by what we're seeing, but I don't believe that there are many organizations that can talk about, oh, I started from here, I applied generative AI to this problem, and now I'm seeing consistently some meaningful productivity improvement or some other measure of improvement. But I think that the early results are encouraging enough that whether it is CIOs or business unit executives, they're saying, let's keep going, right? Let's keep building upon that early success.
Yeah, I mean, so actually, I know one academic study from about a year ago by Eric Brynjolfsson and his team at Stanford, where they surveyed I think an enterprise customer service support team. So a few thousand customer support in enterprise software. Basically, they started using combination of fine-tuning and RAG to help the agents. So agents are still there, but the level of productivity jumped, I think, more than 10% at least, in terms of measured by the number of issues resolved per hour. So
Yes.
Enough so that they were super excited. As you know, I mean, anything that is double digits increase in productivity is something that catches the attention of decision makers, right? But I don't know.
Well,
I don't know how sophisticated that team was in terms of, because that was a year ago, and they were already using a combination of RAG and fine tuning. So it might be one of these more advanced teams, right? So
there are what strikes me based on what you're saying as two things. Number one, obviously the maturity and sophistication of the team that you're starting with, that is applying these technologies, is important. But second, and I talk a little bit about this in the article, if I were to provide some sort of a prescription to the reader, is that the selection of the use case is very important, because we talk about what are use cases that find early success, and we say, well, customer support. Well, customer support covers a lot of territory, right? If I look at, for example, again, going back to financial results, if you look at ServiceNow, ServiceNow has deployed with its customers an LLM. ServiceNow, as you know, is focusing primarily at IT customer support problems, right? So customer support provided by the IT organization, and they're finding great success with that. I mean, all of their customers appear to be happy, based at least on as is reflected in the ServiceNow sales trajectory, right? And that can be it's one aspect of customer support, but we talk to and work with telcos. There is encouraging results, but not necessarily the same level of success that you find in other areas. So selecting the sophistication of the group that is applying, that using the generative AI is important. And even more important is the selection of the use case and how you're circumscribing the use case to make sure that your model performs optimally, and you have the right data, and you can do all the customizations and fine tuning that are necessary.
Yeah, and I guess the key to what you're describing there is the use case is both very practical, and the use case is also something that you can actually deploy, right? So it's not abstract, but it's also very kind of meaningful and practical.
And it has to be measurable. Yeah. I mean, measurability is in these early stages. And now I can speak with the experience of the previous three AI waves that I mentioned earlier in our conversation. One of the major and repeated reasons that killed previous waves was we didn't establish extremely good metrics for assessing whether the amounts that we were spending were giving us the return on that investment. And this is the one thing, by the way, that even today I'm trying to emphasize. Not only the need for the enterprise to establish those metrics, and by the way, some metrics may be common across enterprises, but I expect a number of metrics will have to be specific to the enterprise, and whether it is the CIO or some other executive, maybe the chief AI officer. We're seeing that role appearing more and more now in corporate organizational charts. They need to establish the metrics that are specific to the corporation and to the use case that is being applied, because lack of those metrics has a very big probability, a very significant probability of killing such projects. And in those metrics, by the way. One of the things that I wrote in a different piece, the cost of these models has to be taken into account, because this is something where using the free version of ChatGPT can be very deceptive because it's free, right? So you're thinking that, okay, I bring my own AI from home to what we were saying earlier, and it's free, right? I can use it. But then when you're saying, okay, now I want to deploy it to certain of my groups, now it costs a certain amount, right? And even though the costs have been decreasing over the past couple of years, in some cases significantly, both training and inferencing costs, they can still be very meaningful, very significant. And I want to make sure that corporations are sensitized to this.
Yeah, so a couple of things that struck me with what you said. One is that I think that it's good for teams to maybe, as you pointed out earlier, find something a little more confined and constricted in the beginning. Don't kind of try to target your most sophisticated or advanced application right off the bat. Just like any kind of new technology, it's good to develop some muscle in terms of how you measure success, how you clean data, and all these things. So start very simple. Secondly, I think one of the things that is interesting in recent months, Angelos, is if you were to ask me about a year ago, LLM router, so this notion that, if I give you a prompt, I have a router that will route it to the right model. Last year might have been a little more advanced. This year, I see more and more teams taking it on, and more companies providing tools to do routing. So in which case, there might be some mechanisms where you can start lowering costs. But again, even that notion of routing, maybe that's for phase 2 or 3 of your project.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So first build kind of the most simple app where you have the end-to-end pipeline and you can measure, you can wash, rinse, repeat, and then expand. In which case, kind of the meta point, I guess, that I'm making is that, as Evangelos points out in his post, is you have to position yourself and your team where you can do experiments. Be agile, you can do experiments, you can continue to build your capabilities and skills. But, and to me, at some point, honestly, that might mean you might have to have your own much more flexible platform where, because a lot of your needs might be specific to your data sources and your domain. And so it might be, it might be difficult to if you're going to build this capability throughout your organization, it might be difficult to just go to a cloud provider and hope for the best. Right?
You're bringing a few very important points. So let me try to take them from the top if I could. So the first point is that before you even start with any specific tool or infrastructure, make sure that you have a strategy. And a strategy, as you know, can be very elaborate or it can be more sketchy, but you really need to know where you're going, right? And why you want to get there, and how you will declare success. And we often talk about AI strategy, but again, to bring back a point that you and I were making earlier, AI strategy need to be tightly coupled with a data strategy. So the two need to be going together. The second thing is that you need to look at only a very small number of use cases where you will start experimenting with, and you need to be ruthless in both selecting the initial set of cases, but then ruthless about killing the ones that don't show the right promise. And now, how do you determine which show the right promise? Now I'll go to the next point that you made, which is you really need this iterative experimentation, right? This iterative refinement, constant experimentation, and so that you can gather the data, right? Which again then goes to the next point, which you need to have the right metrics that will allow you to evaluate whether you are indeed going in the right direction according to your strategy, and decide, do I need to change the strategy? Do I need to kill maybe even all of my initially selected use cases and start from scratch? This kind of, and this is why I think the savvier of the CIOs and business unit executives are able to say that yes, we're in this experimentation phase, as opposed to, yeah, we're ready to deploy and do gargantuan projects. And the last point that you need to wrap in all this, which comes, I mean, we talked about the qualifications of the team that initially gets involved. But I will say there are two aspects. There's the qualifications, and then there is the culture. And I think generative AI, more so than other AI, most of the other AI types of technology types that we've seen in the past, because of how it is brought in the corporation, because of what it entails, it requires attention to the culture. And the culture, again, breaks down into two components, if I can say that. One is the culture of the initial team that starts the corporation in this experimentation. The second aspect is the culture of deployment, right? If you're thinking about how do I take now my successful experiment and bring it into my corporate infrastructure, right? Start exposing it to a larger group, to a larger percent of my corporate population. You need to be careful about what is the culture of the people of the groups that you're exposing it to, because that can also be detrimental to the overall success of your project. In other words, you may have done very good experimentation, selected the right use case, brought the right data, brought the right infrastructure, but at the end, your deployment fails because you did not determine what need to be the characteristics of the groups that are going to start with this deployment. One last comment, if I could, with regards to the infrastructure. To me, you made an extremely important point in terms of what corporations will need for infrastructure. And I imagine, I don't have the data for that yet because of where we are, but I imagine it will be very similar to what we've seen with cloud computing deployment. Meaning, in some cases, we will have public clouds provided by hyperscalers. In other words, we will have AI capability provided by AI infrastructure provided by hyperscalers. In other cases, we may have AI infrastructure provided by application providers, not unlike what we had in clouds, right? You have the Adobe cloud, you have the Salesforce cloud. Well, in the same way, you will have the ServiceNow AI, and you will have the Salesforce AI, whatever, right? And then you may have hybrid implementations where some part of your loads are on public clouds, be it from infrastructure players or from application providers, and some provided in your own data centers. And then at the last extreme, you will have AI deployed exclusively in your data centers, right? Which again could become extremely important. Extremely expensive. So all of these are challenges that CIOs have to deal with, right? Have to address, and that's why it's going to take a bit of time until we have these full deployments.
So a couple of points. One is I think that a lot of AI teams either postpone or completely forget about UX, user interface, user interaction. Especially important now because a lot of these applications will impact end users who may not be that technical. So to the extent that in your early pilots, you actually get user feedback, figure out how you incorporate user feedback to continuously improve your model, number one, but also get feedback from your early users, if they're internal users, as to whether or not this way of delivering this AI capability actually is good, or is it freaking users out? you know?
Yeah.
So not enough. I think traditionally AI teams over focus on models, actually forget about data. They focus on models, but now actually UX is also particularly important. And then secondly, I think in terms of experimentation, a lot of these experiments will have to be done at scale because basically, in order for you to figure out the right configuration for whatever setup you have, let's say for retrieval augmented generation, you'll have to turn several knobs
Turn knobs.
and a lot of those knobs require computing at scale. By the way, so in the last few minutes, I want to pivot slightly, Evangelist, and take advantage of your kind of VC background. I put together this.
Ben?
Yeah, can you see this?
Yeah, I can. I wanted to make one addition to your comment about user experience, because I think it's a very important point. One of the things that we are finding is that what I call the eloquence of generative AI models often leads users to disregard correctness of answers. And we have a very big risk there that corporations need to be aware of. I cannot talk about some, because of NDAs, I cannot talk about some of the situations that we've seen with existing customers, but it's a bigger problem than we believe or we have given it credit for to date. So I'll stop here, but
I guess I guess my broader point is not enough people are thinking about UX. Actually, there's a lot of innovation that can be done on the UX side.
I agree, but there's also, even with the existing UX, which is this text-based presentation that we are mostly used to with these systems, harbors a lot of problems that we are not.
Yeah, I just wrote an article where my point was, even if you do everything right, so even with the proper use of LLMs, there's a lot of risk, right? So, all right. So
let's go.
So I by the time this episode airs, I would have published this post called "The Highs and Lows of Generative AI" as a follow-up to my "Why Are Your Generative AI Projects Failing?" But broadly speaking, so I think that Evangelist and I are old enough to remember some of the previous bubbles in tech. And it's fair to say probably we are in a bubble. I guess, how would you define a bubble? I guess a lot of investments in AI startups. Some startups have very high valuation, but not enough revenue. I guess
actually, most of the startups,
most of them are in this category. So then I put together this kind of graphic where I have some of the positive things to look forward to, some neutral things, and a bunch of negative things. So I'll focus the remaining of this conversation on some of the challenges that startups may face. Obviously, the first one is, I guess, the overhype. And, I mean, as Evangelist pointed out in his post and early in this conversation, AI budgets are growing, but are they growing fast enough to save many of these startups? What's your sense?
So I will make 2 points. Number one, as investors, as venture investors, we see a lot of sameness in the investment proposals that we receive. So I would say that entrepreneurs need to think harder in most cases about what they want to propose to a venture investor, why their proposal requires venture funding as opposed to some other type of funding, and why they're going to win and how, right? We don't see a lot of that. And when I talk to other fellow investors, whether it is publicly in panel discussions or privately, they express the same issue. The second is that now, if I were to go on the enterprise side, one of the complaints that I hear from executives, which is, by the way, is not unlike a complaint that I hear about cybersecurity startups, which is there are so many, I do not have time or bandwidth to conduct a POC with XYZ startup. So there is, so this means that the entrepreneurs really need to think about how are they going to penetrate the market. And I don't see that depth of thought taking place. I think there is we're still at the entrepreneurs and many investors are still at the point where they say, oh, if it's AI, it's got to be good, I'm going to fund it. Or the entrepreneur thinking, if it's AI, I'm going to get funding then I'm going to get funding at very high valuation. And I don't think that's the case anymore, but
Yeah,
we're definitely seeing
it. I guess the company with probably the most revenue from AI right now is Microsoft, and even their revenue is their AI revenue is a fraction of their overall revenue, right? So, but if you can imagine the amount of investment that is poured into the AI space and the amount of expense still ongoing, because all these AI startups are spending a lot on talent and compute.
Well, look, one of the questions that I typically ask entrepreneurs that make it to us is how much money, what is the overall investment that you believe your company will need to, let's say, break even? And by and large, all of them have no idea. That's troubling, right? Because you're essentially what you're doing is you're spending in a very much you're spending a lot of money, and you may not have an idea of how much money you will need to raise and whether indeed you will have the ROI that you expect for that investment. This is, again, I think that a similar calculus is going to start happening in the enterprise with the CFO starting to ask, okay, we allocated X amount of money, whether it is from an existing budget or with a new budget. Are we getting the ROI that we were expecting from that investment? And during bubbles, in these bubble years, very few people ask that question, and then all of a sudden they start asking it, and you're hitting a wall, and that's when problems arise.
Yeah, and then there's not much moat. A lot of them seem like features that can be incorporated into. It's good that they exist because they're pointing out gaps in tools and in systems, but at the end of the day, after you look at them carefully, you go, you know what? This can be folded into something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Look, because our firm has been investing in AI startups since our inception in 2016, since our founding. So this is not a new thing for us. Whereas, anyway, it's not a new thing for us. I have many fellow investors who come and ask for advice. We strike conversations. And one of the common refrains is that, well, I invested in company X. 6 months later, what they were proposing to do, one of the big guys is already doing. So now we need to go find a new model, a new product, a new service. And now we have less money, right? Because in this initial 6 months, we were spending very aggressively. and now we have no business, right? And that is starting to appear, at least in our circles, in the venture circles, much more frequently than is being described or is being exposed.
Do you think that I guess since I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, most of the people I run into startups, they tend to be horizontal platforms, but it seems like being vertical is a lot more a lot more promising. But obviously, many of the people I know are engineers, and so they would rather build things for their fellow engineers, and they don't want to commit to a single vertical that they may
Yeah.
or may not be interested in, right?
Well, Silicon Valley has always been, on the IT side, has always have a predisposition to horizontal offerings. I would tell you that we've made one new investment in the last 12 months because of the reasons that we explained, we've been discussing. It's in a highly vertical application, highly vertical. And we've looked at a few others, and we continue to look for vertical applications, because I think that for a startup in this environment where you have billions being invested by large corporations and certain other private companies, like OpenAI is no longer a startup; it's a private company with. So there are a few companies, obviously, that have the ability, private or not, the ability to invest very large sums of money. They have the ability to raise very large sums of money. The average AI startup cannot do this. So where we believe there is going to be opportunity for the startup is in understanding a vertical process, vertical business process in a particular one or two industries, and then providing like a very differentiated application for that industry, for that process. And that increases the probability of obviously being acquired, for having a very nice exit, whether it's most likely through acquisition, but also depending on what environment we head to, even IPOs.
So how does this bubble end? Do we have a bust or a soft landing or a gradual deflation?
So this is a question we've been asking ourselves a lot. And if I were to what I try, I'm the old person here.
So Jerome Powell may cut rates. Who knows, right?
Absolutely. But what I was saying is that if the previous three AI sprints have been a guide, I would say at best we will have soft landing. At worst, we will hit the wall going 100 miles an hour. This is what happened in the past. There is no question that we will see leaders and winners coming out of this period, but we are overfunding again. We are overfunding, and we are overfunding sameness. That's the big issue that I have.
So so in the dot-com era, that bubble, people were going public. Here, people were getting this. This time around, people are getting this massive valuations, but then now everyone is staring at a down round, right?
Exactly.
So at least
exactly.
we don't have the public markets involved in this particular case, right? So.
Well, public investors are asking when it's a good time to take a company public. Will there be new public companies that are focused exclusively on AI? It is not clear yet. I mean, maybe one example could be a company like C3 AI. That is public and managed to go public some time ago, but it took them a long time, and I don't think they have the.
I don't even know if they have technology.
Yeah, again, that's it's a challenging question that
No, but
investment bankers.
At least we don't have retail investors who are going to get
Hammered.
hammered, right? When
Yeah.
this bubble deflates, right? So, and
Yeah.
with that, thank you, Evangelos.
Thank you.